Hi, it's Bimerzen, and in this video I'm going to show you how to remove the valve cover, the VANOS units and the camshafts on a BMW N43 engine. This is a very common procedure for doing work on the top side of the engine, like replacing the gasket, replacing the chain or replacing the valve stem seals. So first we have to remove the microfilter housing here, and it is attached with 8mm screws, and you remove them and pull off the cover and reveal the debris underneath. Next we need to remove the two covers on the left and on the right side of the car, and you have to undo these clips here using a flat screwdriver and just unhook it. There's another one on this side, and it should just pop off. Then we have to disconnect this hood sensor and remove the wire that goes to the switch. Okay. Then we have to remove two 8mm screws on this side and also on that side. Next we have to remove this front cable here. So there are pins here that you have to press in and it should release. And then you can pull it out. Be careful you don't break these pieces here like I just did. So yeah, take a note of that. And now we can take out the rest of the harness. And now we can finally take out the whole tray. I'm gonna give this bit a little bit of a clean, just to prevent any debris from falling inside of the engine later. Remove this front intake duct. Now let's remove the acoustic cover, and we have to use Torx. There's another Torx screw here at the back. And it's gone. Remove the oil cap. Now we should be able to remove the cover. I'm gonna put the oil cap back on so I avoid accidentally dropping anything inside the engine at this point. Next we have to remove the coils, so we just have to leave the plugs and they should release like this, and then we should be able to pull the coil out of its location. And this one is nasty. Whoa! What was going on with this engine? This one is a bit better. Number 3 looks decent. Number 4. Oh. Okay, let's see. This one is also kinda decent. I always mark the components so I know where they came from. So if I have to debug any issues later on, I know the exact location of the component. Next we have to remove all of the wiring. So for now let's put this to the side. To remove the injector connector, you have to use a flat screwdriver and pry this piece out, and then you can pull out the connector. Next we have to remove this box here, and we also need to undo the nuts for the grounding cable. Well, that did not work. Okay. I'll have to figure something out, but it looks like that the main 10mm bolt started to unscrew, and yeah, let me just fix this. I was able to grab the bottom bolt with the 10mm spanner and release the 8mm nut at the top. Okay, we can remove the grounding now and unwind the wire. Now we can remove the boxes. You just have to press on the tabs and it should release. And we can now put this to the side. And we do the same at the back. Okay. And we also need to unplug the sensor on the high pressure fuel pump. You just have to press on the tab and pull the connector out. Okay, now let's try and remove this back box. And let's try and put it out of the way as much as possible. I think it's best I just remove this cross brace and get it out of the way as soon as possible. So you have to undo two torque bolts. One is here and the one is hidden behind this cover. So I'm gonna use a huge screwdriver and rotate it 45 degrees. And now I should be able to pry it out. And by the way, there's a seal here, and if it's damaged you have to replace this cover, otherwise water's gonna get in and you'll have a rusty car. And the center bolt is E18. This one is E14. Carefully, and the brace is out. Whoa, that's gonna be easier now. Now it's time to remove the high pressure fuel lines, and before you do that you have to disconnect the battery because there's gonna be some gasoline pouring out and you don't want to start a fire, don't you? And also make sure that you work as cleanly as possible because you definitely do not want to introduce any dirt into the fuel system because that will clog up the injectors and yeah, you're gonna have a very bad day. So I'm going to first give it a little clean with brake clean, and then I'm going to remove the fuel lines and put them in plastic bags, and the manual states that you should put end covers on the lines so not to introduce any dirt inside. I've used the zip tie and tie off the wire harness so it's out of the way. And I'm also going to remove this wire that goes to the starter motor. This is the plus. So I just need to remove this piece of plastic here. And that exposes the nut, so we can remove it. So the plan is to remove the nuts on this side of the fuel lines, and I'm gonna leave these nuts attached and I'm gonna try and remove it as a single unit together with the high pressure fuel rail. And I will have to remove this pressure connector here. There's a tab underneath. I'm gonna use a flat screwdriver and pull it out. I'm also going to disconnect the low pressure fuel line, and I'm also going to remove this pressure sensor. So this sensor is actually the high pressure sensor, and this one is the low pressure sensor here. To get to this connector at the back, I will have to disconnect this PCV hose, and you have to squeeze two tabs and then you should be able to slightly wiggle it and eventually pull it out. I'm gonna use a little bit of WD-40 here. Let's try again. Okay. Now we disconnect the sensor. There's a tab at the back and you have to squeeze it and pull out the connector and it should release. So here's the tab. Next we have to disconnect the low pressure fuel line, and you first have to remove this safety ring. You just pry it off. And then I'm going to use a rag to make sure that all of the excess gas is soaked into the rag. And I'm also gonna be careful. There could be some pressure here and the fuel could just, you know, spray around, so be careful. To release this, you have to push the hose in, and then you should be able to push this part in and it should release. I also used some masking tape and block off the intake side of the fuel rail. I've used paper towels inside of the spark plug holes. That's because we don't want any excess fuel to spray in there, because the fuel messes with the resistance of the rubber on the coil, and that can introduce all sorts of issues later down the line. So I've also put a paper towel underneath and I made sure that everything is nice and clean. And now I'm going to use a 17mm spanner and slowly loosen the tightening nuts on the fuel pump. I'm gonna go slowly. There should be no pressure here because the engine was standing for quite a while, but you still might have some pressure in, so be careful. Go slowly. To release the fuel lines on the injectors, we're gonna need 13 and 14mm spanners, and we have to hold the bottom bolt with 13mm spanner and the top bolt is 14. Okay, now we just have to do the rest. To remove the fuel rail, you have to remove 3 11mm bolts that are on the side of the engine. Be careful you don't drop the bolts inside of the engine. Let's try and remove the rail. Hopefully this will work. Again, be careful, don't introduce any dirt inside of the fuel line. Okay, that kinda worked. I'm gonna put this in a plastic bag. I'm gonna seal off the ports and keep it in a nice clean environment. I have all the injectors blocked off with masking tape. I also blocked off the fuel pump. Now it's time to remove the high pressure fuel pump by removing the two T30 Torx bolts. We can now remove the gasket. And now we can finally start removing the bolts. Okay, I think we're finally ready to remove the valve cover. So all the bolts are released. Let's see how it goes. Okay, it's out. Okay, let's do the first inspection of the components. Let's see if we can see anything out of the ordinary. So far, so good. Let's see the camshafts. The chain is nice and tight, and the plastic rail guide is in one piece. So this is good. Let's see what's going on with the VANOS units. So I'm just gonna try and rotate it a little bit. So what I'm looking for is if the bolts are rotating with the sprocket part, and if they are rotating, independently, then it means that the VANOS unit is not locked. You can see that there's a little bit of movement here, but this is nothing too problematic. Now we have to remove the VANOS units, and to do that we will need the timing kit for the BMW's N43 engine. This is the kit right here. It's cheap, it's from eBay. It costs around 60 to 70 euros at the moment. And we will have to use this back locking tool to lock the camshafts. And as you can see, the camshafts have some fittings at the back that are flat, so you can insert this locking tool, and when you lock the camshafts at the back, you can then release the VANOS bolts. To get the camshafts into correct orientation, you will have to rotate the engine at the crankshaft using a 22mm socket and a ratchet. There's just enough space here so I can feed the ratchet and rotate the engine clockwise. This is the running direction. And you have to rotate the engine until the intake camshaft is in the correct orientation. So the lobes on the camshaft are pointing towards the center of the engine. And you can also see that there are some reliefs cut in the camshaft. To make the camshaft locking tools easier to install, you need to remove the oil lines. And to do this, you have to remove the 11mm banjo bolts. I will try and insert the exhaust side first, because there's not a lot of space back there. So currently I am rotating the engine counterclockwise just to get the angle right. Okay, so the exhaust camshaft is in position. Now let's see what's going on the intake, and I can see that the intake side is slightly out of position. Now I'm going to try and rotate it at the VANOS bolt, and let's see if we can get this into position. Yeah, it's not going. Well, I wasn't able to get both camshafts into correct orientation. I'm not sure if the chain jumped on one VANOS unit, doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this locking piece here from the tool, and then I'm just going to undo the exhaust side, and then I'll do the intake side. Locking piece removed. Let's try again. Okay, now I'm going to use the provided bolts to lock the locking tool in place. Well, actually, I guess you have to put this in before you put in the tool. Exhaust side locked, the bolts are nice and tight. And now we can remove the exhaust VANOS bolt. I also removed this 10mm bolt that holds the wiring harness here, and this is just so I can get to this bolt easier. Now we can remove the VANOS bolt. Now we have to reattach this intake side locking piece, and let's see how much we need. Yeah, that's quite a lot. Maybe the chain did jump. Not sure. Well, let's rotate the crankshaft. Okay, this should be good. Let's put back the bolts. Now let's undo the intake side VANOS bolt. Next we have to remove the two torque screws here at the front. This is the E8. Make sure you don't drop anything inside of the engine. Now we should be able to remove the VANOS units. They should just slide off. Now let's do the exhaust side. Well, very interesting. So the rail is broken. Look at this. Yeah, we could have a jumped chain. This is a very common problem on all N series BMW engines, especially the N42 and N46, and I guess also the N43. So this is no good. Now we can remove the back locking tools. Okay, finally. Now we can remove this front bearing shell, and we just have to remove 4 10mm nuts. Next we have to remove the rest of the clamshells, and there's a procedure on how to remove them. So you first have to do half a turn intervals, and you start with this nut here. So let's go half a turn. And then you have to go on the other side. And then you go to the shell number 2. And then you go to the last shell, number 4. And then you go to the first shell. And you just repeat this process until the camshaft is released. Remove the cup bearings. They are marked from E1 to E4, so you can't really mix them up. And take out the camshaft. Quick side note, I've decided to 3D print the caps for the fuel injectors. This is how they look like. They're very simple design, and you just press it on and your injector should be secured. Much better option than using masking tape, I think. Now we have to remove the exhaust camshaft. The procedure is the same as for the intake side. So you have to do half a turn on the nuts, and you have to start with this nut here, and then you go to this nut, to this nut, to this nut, to this nut at the back, and then this nut, and then all the way at the front, the top nut and the bottom nut. You have to do half a turn. Now we can remove the bearings. And loose the plunger. And remove the exhaust camshaft. And the next video is gonna be on how to replace the chain and replace this broken chainrail guide. And I'm also going to make a video on how to replace the valve stem seals on the BMW's N43 engine using this special 3D printed tool that I make. So this tool makes this process a bit faster and easier, and you need to replace the seals if you have high oil consumption. It's usually the bad seals, not the piston rings. This brings us to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing and liking if you have N42, N46 or N43 engine. Keep zen and continue the art of BMW maintenance.